All right, so let's get going on today's meeting. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of go over some more details that you'll need for the upcoming work that we're going to be engaging in. Specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about how to use theories, how to apply theories, how to do the deductive work that you'll need for the synthesis part of your project. And then we're also going to take a look at the criteria that you'll require for writing each section. So all that and more today, but before we get to that, I just want to introduce the social media development program that we have here. This is for bonus points. It's completely optional, but it's a way to get bonus points towards your grade in this course, while at the same time, and very important for students at your stage, starting or maintaining or developing a professional presence on social media to help you in whatever your next stage might be. So whether you're going to graduate and apply for a job, whether you're graduating and applying for grad school, having a professional social media presence is very, very important. So why is this so important? So the data we're going to take a look at came from employers, came from companies, but this is also going to be true of graduate schools as well because they have the same sort of criteria. So why is having a professional social media presence important? Well, in a recent survey, 70% of employers say that they actually look at your social media profile. So 7 out of 10 employers, when they're thinking about, do I want to hire you? Or graduate schools, when they're asking themselves, do I want to admit this student? They will take a look at your social media profile. So what is it that they're looking for? Well, 61% are looking for information that supports your qualifications. So I am always amazed at how many graduate school applications mention that they have loved psychology forever, that they are dedicated to psychology, that psychology is, one of the, the area of interest of theirs that is the biggest thing, it's a main area of interest. And a graduate school will say, all right, well, let me take a look at your social media feed and see how much of it is about psychology, right? Is this person really dedicated to psychology? Is this person really into and interested in psychology as much as they say? If so, it should be reflected in your social media profile. So we're going to develop this so that it does support your qualifications. 50% of employers are looking to see if you just have a professional online persona. So are you online? And is it a professional account? 50% of them just want to know that you do have that presence. 37% of employers want to see what other people are posting with you. So how are you at interacting with your community? How are you perceived in your network of associations and connections? And then very importantly, 20% of those employers are looking for any reason not to hire you. They're looking for anything on your social media feed that would say to them, I do not want to hire this person, or I do not want to accept them into graduate school. So it's very important to develop a professional social media profile so that you can take advantage of the myriad of benefits that come with being plugged into a community. You can convince employers and grad schools to accept you into their institutions, and you can avoid any of the reasons that they might have for not hiring you. So that's some of the benefits that we're going to be trying to develop. Another thing that is very, very useful, especially at this stage and why you want to have a social media professional presence, is getting connected with your community. So getting connected with like-minded people like fellow students who are going through the exact same challenges that you're going through, that might have insight into how to navigate those challenges, that might have tips or suggestions about what to do. Fellow students that might post opportunities that maybe they can't take advantage of, but maybe you'd be interested in. So it's a great way to connect with your community, to leverage the power of experience from people in your particular situation. And it's also a great way to connect with your community in terms of professional psychologists. So it's a great way to take advantage of the knowledge that psychologists have and take advantage of their content that they're promoting, and also becoming a part of a community, becoming a recognized name in that community, So when your application crosses their desk, instead of this being the first time that they're encountering you, you already have a little bit of history. You already have a little bit of contact. You already have a little bit of name recognition. So we're going to try to build that as we go through this developmental process. So we're going to start off with step number 1. And for those of you that might be in 2 of my classes, this one and another one, we're actually going to tailor the senior seminar social media development a little bit more specifically for this group, especially because you will have content that you can share. Your research is going to be new, it's going to be exciting, it's going to be very interesting. You're going to have a lot of content that you can share that other students in other classes might not have. But to begin it, everybody's going to begin with the same assignment, and that is to have a professional account. So we're going to sign up for a Twitter account. If you want to take advantage of this, sign up for a Twitter account. Twitter was chosen because it is the social media platform that is the most used by both employers and grad school. So if you take a look at the list of social media platforms that are used by employers, LinkedIn is number 1, and then there's other ones that it uses, and Twitter is in the top 5. If you take a look at the social media platforms that graduate schools use, I can't remember what's number 1, but Twitter is also in the top 5. Twitter is the only one that's in the top 5 for both of those areas. So that's the one that we're going to use. That's why we're signing up for a Twitter account. If you don't have an account, you can sign up using this link right here. And these files are available in Canvas under the Social Media Professional Development folder in Files. So you'll sign up right there. And it's just like signing up for any other account. Enter in your information, choose a username, and you're off and running. Choose a username that's professional. We've all had experience choosing email addresses now, so choose something like that as well. Remember, this is a professional account. If you already do have an account, then you're going to want to get a second account. So if you already have a personal account where you've already been posting personal things, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely acceptable. Definitely have that account. But you are going to want to have a separate professional account. So I have 2 Twitter accounts. One of them is my personal account, where I basically post videos of my daughter from swim meets. The other one is my professional account, where I post everything about psychology. You want to make sure to keep those 2 worlds separate because people are not necessarily going to be interested in both of those. You want to keep your professional account professional. So if you already have a Twitter account, I would highly recommend sign up for a new one. So there's a link there on how to manage and set up multiple accounts. And you just have a new account, and that's going to be your professional account. So if you are taking advantage of this to get those bonus points, what you want to do is send me a screenshot of your Twitter username, and you're going to upload that via Canvas assignments. So what I'm looking for, if you go to your profile here, you'll see this information. What I need is that information right there. So your name, and then it'll have your username as well. So send a screenshot of that. That's part 1 of this assignment. Part 2 is to get plugged into your first sort of entrance into the community. And you do that by following me at Polite Insane on Twitter. And then to get points for this, just send me a screenshot of your following list and upload that via Canvas assignments. So you would go to your profile, and right here where it says how many individuals you're following, you would click on that and then just send me a list that make sure that it has my account visible. You would upload that to Canvas, and that would be part 2 of assignment number 1. All right, any questions on that before we wrap it up? All right, so once again, very important to have a social media profile now that's dedicated to a professional persona. And then also, this is a great way to plug in with fellow students around the world, great way to plug in with psychologists around the world. And we are going to tailor this for the senior seminar experience to set you up for maximal opportunities at either employment once you graduate or grad school. And the due date for this part 1 is going to be Monday, January 27th by midnight. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take care of a little bit of administrative business. So the syllabus is now up and it's available. It's in Canvas. Highly recommend download it, take a look around. A lot of good information there in terms of contact and other info for the course. What I want to draw attention to now is we now have the schedule for the presentations. So I listed dates where we had opportunities for presentations that nobody signed up for. So for example, nobody chose today, so I'm going to use that time to just go over some things that we need for the course. And then on days where there's open times, I'll also fill in that time as well with just moving the course along, things that you need to know for your upcoming assignments and things. But it also now has the due dates as well. So when things are due, notice that they're always due midnight the day before we meet for class. So the video on mindset is due tomorrow by midnight. The plagiarism certificate test and your APA online quizzes are due Monday, January 27th by midnight. So be sure that you are aware, and also take a look at your scheduled date for your presentation. And most people got their first selection. I think only one person had to go to selection number 3 in terms of their preferred selection. So that just worked out. So make sure that you know when you're presenting. So the entire list there is populated. And again, on days where there's open slots, I'll just fill in a little bit of that time with some extra information. But the last one that I want to, or two of the ones that I want to point out, on March 10th, we're going to have a special class. We're going to meet with Dr. Stephanie De Silva. She is an external professor who is coming to IUSB to evaluate and review our psychology program here. So every once in a while, about every 7 years, we go through this review of our program here. And as the most senior products of this program, she's very interested in talking to students in the senior seminar. So we've scheduled a special day for a meeting with Dr. Stephanie De Silva, where she'll basically just come in here and just want to talk to you guys about your experience here at IUSB. So I've scheduled that on March 10th, and then spring recess, no classes. And then once we get into the final stages, we're going to go through some of the final things that we need to discuss, like putting a research in a conference talk, putting the final paper together. And I just want to point out that we now have a finalized date for the undergraduate research conference. So the URC is going to be on April 10th, so that's a Friday. So I highly recommend participating in the URC. Put that on your calendar. It is a massively rewarding experience. It's also going to be a great piece of your online professional presence. It's a great thing to have in your CV for grad schools and for employers. It's that sort of above and beyond what's required for the course kind of experience that they look for. So I highly recommend that you attend the URC. If you do, this is where you're going to do your conference talk presentation. So you need to do an oral presentation where you stand in front of a PowerPoint slides and you go through your project, your completed research project. You will do that regardless of whether you do it at the URC or not. So if you do it at the URC, that's the only time you need to do it. You will get bonus points for participating in the URC. If for whatever reason you cannot do it at the URC, we do have other days available where you will do it in class. So you are going to stand up in front of PowerPoint slides and tell everybody about your presentation. But I would highly recommend do it at the undergraduate research conference. Get the benefit of getting your presentation out there, and give your work the exposure that it deserves. Last day of classes, we're going to have the poster session. I put that as tentative. I just want to make sure that there's no other kind of conflicts going on in the hallway or anything like that. But that's going to be the last day of classes. And then notice that throughout this, we have due dates for when your draft comes in, when the peer reviews are due, when the next draft comes in, and when those peer reviews are due. So keep those in mind. We're going to talk today about what's going to go into your drafts. But your visual perception draft, that's your first major piece of writing. That's going to be due on February 10th by midnight. Then that is going to be available for reviews. You'll review each other's drafts, and the reviews are going to be due February 17th. So you got 1 week to review those manuscripts. And then you have 1 week after that to get your diversity draft in, and then you have 1 week after that to get your diversity draft reviews completed. So this is all done so that you have time to get your drafts in, review other students' drafts, use their reviews to make your drafts better, and then continue the process and cycle through. And we'll talk about what exactly goes into the drafts in just a moment. So that's it for the syllabus. Just make sure that you are aware it's up. Take a look through it. And any questions on that before we take a look at our first kind of instruction for the day? All right, perfect. All right, so we're at the stage right now where we're doing a lot of background research. And we're at the stage right now where we're trying to piece together what's our new contribution. So we're taking a look at what has already been done. We're taking a look at what is already out there. And what we want to do is we want to find these theories, find these explanations, and then apply these theories to make a new contribution. Basically say that if these theories are true, if I apply them in this situation, this is what should occur. And that conclusion, that this is what should occur, is going to be your novel contribution to psychology. So all of that requires the ability to apply theories. So we're going to talk about the background research. This is where you get your theories from. This is where you get those prior theories. We're going to talk about deductions, how you might need to make simplifications, how you're going to make new applications. And then we're going to talk about the synthesis of it. Basically, as you're going through your readings, what are some of the highly likely road maps or road markers, the highly likely green flags that you should keep an eye out for that'll help you make this sort of help you in that synthesis aspect, help you make those new applications. These are just some of the usual suspects that you should keep an eye out for because they're highly likely to pay out. So in terms of our timeline of getting from having nothing really that we're beginning with all the way down to a published article, those are all the sort of steps along the way. And today we're going to take a look at what do you need for the drafts. That's going to be our main area of focus. What do you need for that? Should it take out the visual perception draft, diversity draft, and synthesis draft? And don't also forget, as I mentioned before, we now have that URC date, Friday, April 10th. So this is your chance again to showcase this wonderful work that you're doing to the world. And basically put it out there and give it the real impact that it should have. So again, put that on your calendar. That's one of the big goals that we're going to have for this semester. All right, background research. So background research is the prior theories that you're dealing with. So we're going to make a new contribution, but we cannot make a new meaningful contribution just by saying, well, this is what I think, or this is my take on this, or this is what I believe, without building upon what came first, right? So we need to stand on the shoulders of giants. We need to stand on what came before, and that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with prior theories about the phenomenon that we're interested in. So we're all interested in some sort of psychological phenomenon. This phenomenon has been researched before. Studies have been done on it before. Theories about it have come out. That's what your background research is right now. Finding those theories, understanding those theories, becoming aware of those theories. That's what we're going to start with. And your theories can come from your own research. So your own looking into the databases, finding articles, following citation paths and reference paths. So taking a look at who has cited this work, taking a look at what work have they cited, following those little breadcrumbs through a particular domain, and also from the student presentations. Somebody might give a presentation that for an article that they found for their work, and you might say to yourself, wow, that's a really interesting idea. I'm also going to use that theory as well, or I'm going to use that insight as well. That's one of the big goals and purposes of these student presentations. So that's what you're going to start with. You're going to start with prior theories. From those prior theories, you're going to make deductions. You are going to deduce new things about the question that you are interested in. You're going to deduce new things about the area that you want to contribute to. And importantly, because it's new, because it hasn't been studied or it hasn't been incorporated into your theories, most of your theories will not be directly applicable. They will not be directly able to be applied to the particular area that you're looking at. If they could, then you're not doing any novel contribution, right? You're not making that novel contribution if the theory directly explains your area of interest. If your theory does not directly explain your area of interest, that's a good indication that you really are doing something new and something novel. So get ready that your theories will not be directly applicable. You will not be able to say, oh, I can apply this theory straight to this situation. I can apply this theory exactly to this situation. That's not necessarily going to happen, and just be kind of aware of that. So because of this, you might need to make simplifications. You might need to make generalizations. You might need to take a look at the broad strokes, and that you do in order to make new applications, in order to say, all right, I'm going to apply this theory in a new way to this area here, and in order for me to do that, I kind of need to simplify this theory down to its basic tenets. I kind of have to simplify this theory down to its basic ideas. I can't get hung up in the nitty-gritty of it, but I just need to kind of simplify it so I can apply it to this new situation. All right, so let me give you an example of this. So I did studies back at the University of Toronto on drawing in the blind. So this is Dr. John Kennedy. He was my PhD supervisor, an all-around amazing human being. This is Eşref Armagan. He's a blind painter from Turkey. And here is an experiment that we worked on where we would give Eşref these different objects here, and we would put it in different configurations, and we would simply have him hold or handle the objects, and then give him a raised line drawing kit and have him draw out what he saw. I just made a mistake. He didn't see anything. He's blind. Just draw out what he perceived, what he felt. You would be amazed once you get into research like this, how much of your language is visual, right? And if you see what I mean, you'll know exactly that it is very visual, because I just said if you see what I mean. So so that's something that you will, if you get involved in this, you'll learn how to correctly pronounce it. So anyways, the point of this is, if I wanted to predict what's going to happen here, what's going to happen when a blind person draws, all right? And let's say that there has never been any research done on blind people in drawing. Let's say that it's a completely new area. Nobody has ever looked at blind people in drawing. What would I start with? Well, I would start with previous theories. I would start with previous theories about blind people, and I would start with previous theories about people with sight. I would start with previous theories about touch, and I would start with previous theories about vision. And if I was to simplify these theories down to their kind of basic principles, you could simplify it and basically say, well, the visual cortex, that area of the brain, that is the area of the brain that controls vision. That is the area of the brain that produces vision. That's your visual area where you do all your visual processing. The somatosensory cortex, that area of the brain is for touch. That's the area that's dedicated for touch. So over here we have the visual cortex where vision is done. Over here we have the somatosensory cortex where touch is done. Is that a massive oversimplification? Absolutely. Are there like 1 billion regions in the visual cortex? Yes, there are. Are there 1 million regions in the somatosensory cortex? Yes, there are. But for our purposes of making deductions, we don't have to go down to the nitty-gritty. Go to a simplification level where it kind of makes sense to your mind and you don't get caught up in those little details. All right, so we got a visual cortex, we got a somatosensory cortex. So we simplify it. Somatosensory cortex processes touch. It's true, right? It's not the entire story. We're not lying here, though. That's the important thing. We don't want to say, oh, somatosensory cortex processes vision. That's incorrect. That's not true. but it does process touch. Does it process other things? Evidence that there is. But mostly it's touch, so we can simplify it and say somatosensory cortex processes touch. Visual cortex processes vision. And we get this from our previous theories. So previous theories have shown that the somatosensory cortex processes touch. Previous theories have shown that the visual cortex processes vision. Tactile tasks use the somatosensory cortex. So previous studies, when they put people into fMRIs and they said, touch this, you will see that this area of the brain lights up. Visual tasks use the visual cortex. When they put people into fMRIs and say, look at this area of the brain lights up. So again, these are all basic simplifications of a lot of research. But we have these background theories. And then the last piece that we need is this idea that different areas of the cortex process things in different ways, and this is known as localization of function. So different areas of the brain process different types of information, and they process it in different ways. So your visual system processes visual information, and it's going to process that in a certain way. Your somatosensory region processes tactile information, it's going to process that in a certain way. So this, again, simplification, but in general true, this is generally the way that things work. So once we have all those prior theories, we are then ready to make a contribution, a novel contribution to psychology by saying, all right, given that all of those things are correct, if it's true that visual tasks occur in one area, specifically the visual cortex, and if it's true that tactile tasks occur in another area, and it's true that different areas process things differently, if these three theories are true, then I can conclude that tasks using visual input should be solved differently than tasks using tactile input. I can make that conclusion based on never running a subject, but based on theories that show that visual tasks occur in this area, tactile tasks occur in this area, and different areas of the brain process information differently. And what that means is that if you give, and this is the new application, if you give a task that involves visual input, that should be solved differently than a task that involves tactile input. That's a conclusion. We can take it a little bit further and say, all right, drawing is a visual task when it's done by a sighted person. Drawing is a tactile task when it's done by a blind person. So drawings by a sighted person should look different than drawings by a blind person. So without ever running a subject, based on what was known about the visual cortex and visual processing, based on what was known about the somatosensory cortex and tactile processing, based on what is known about localization of function, I could make the prediction that drawings by a blind individual should look completely different than drawings by a sighted individual. Any questions about that? All right. That's the work that you're doing in this course this semester. That's what you're trying to get to. And I hope that this example kind of illustrated what you're trying to do. And the other reason I chose this example is because this makes complete deductive sense. We followed a deductive trail of logical reasoning based on prior theories to come to this conclusion. And in the end, we found out that this conclusion is completely false. And tactile blind people draw pictures that look very much like pictures drawn by sighted individuals. So do not worry at all whether or not your predictions are actually true. Make sure that the predictions follow a logical sequence. So the first thing that I want you to take home is that I don't want you to get caught up in whether or not this is true, whether or not this is actually going to be the case. What we're doing in this course is we are doing the theoretical work that is required before the experiments are run. We are doing the theoretical work that scientists do in order to say this is the way that it should be based on these theories here. So the best analogy for this in our current world is in physics. Physics, when it started out hundreds of years ago, Physics was simple enough. So when Newton came up with the first laws of gravity and Newton came up with his laws of motion, as a physicist, you could learn all the theories and then you can go and do all the experiments. So the theories were not so complicated that you couldn't learn the theories and at the same time have enough skills to actually run those experiments as well. But as physics developed, what happened is that the theories got very, very complicated. And the actual running of experiments got very, very complicated to the point where you needed a PhD just to understand the theories. And then you needed a separate PhD just to run the large Hadron colliders that they're doing now to investigate the nature of matter. So what happened with physics is that you had theoretical work and you had empirical work. And it used to be done by the same people, but it eventually got so complicated that it split. And you had your theoretical physicists doing theoretical work, and then you had your empirical physicists doing empirical work. You had your theoretical physicists looking at theories and making predictions, and then you had your empirical physicists doing the experiments and testing those predictions. The two of them split because it got very complicated. Psychology right now is right about here. The split has started, and the theoretical work in psychology is getting so complicated that it's going to require people that focus only on theoretical psychology. That's what we're doing in this course. It is theoretical psychology. It is saying, if these theories are true, what should we find? And whether or not that's what we actually find, that's for empirical psychologists to find out. What we're doing in this course is we're doing the theoretical work that theoretical psychologists, this kind of new psychologists are starting to do. All right, any questions on that kind of ideas so far? All right, let's start taking a look at a couple of key ideas. So key idea number one, and these are things you're gonna want to remember going forward. Whatever theory you come across, whatever theory you're interested in, whatever theory you look at and say, okay, this theory is, a good explanation of this phenomenon that I'm looking at. For the rest of your work, proceed as if that theory is true. So the way to start deductions is to say, all right, I'm going to start with this theory, and if this theory is true, what's going to happen? So so your reasoning is start as if a theory is true, and then if that theory is true, you're trying to figure out what would happen in a new situation, what would happen in a new application, and that what will happen is your contribution. So you might encounter numerous theories that disagree with each other. This is something that's going to happen as you delve in deeper, right? There's a lot of psychology theories that are competing with each other. So there's a lot of things that are like, imagery is propositional in nature. No, it's not. Imagery uses imagery representation. And here's all these studies that support this theory, and here's all these studies that support this theory. And then there's this third theory that tries to explain the phenomenon, and another theory comes in. There's a lot of competing theories. That's part of the way that psychology works. New theories come up, old theories die out. Our theories continually get better and better and better. But what do you do when your phenomenon that you're working on for this project, if there's three competing theories, if there's three competing ideas for what's going on with your phenomenon? Well, in that case, you might encounter numerous theories that disagree. Pick one, pick a side, pick a theory, and then proceed as if it is true. So if you're doing work on, how does the mind represent visual information, and there's one camp that says, oh, it's all propositional, and then there's another camp that says, oh, it's all imagery based, and you can't proceed with those two competing theories. You can't say, it's hard to do deduction when you're like, well, let me consider two things at the same time. For this project, you have free reign to say, we're starting with these theories over here. We're starting with this idea as our starting off point. We're going to start off with the idea that this is the theories that we're going to work on as true. That doesn't mean that the other theories aren't true, that there isn't any basis for it, but you need to have that as your beginning for your deductions. So definitely you're going to encounter numerous theories that might explain the phenomenon that you're looking at. For whatever reason, pick the one that you like the best. Maybe it has the most support. Maybe it just makes the most sense to you. Maybe it's, I don't know, just whatever the reason. If you have competing theories, pick one general explanation, and then proceed as if that theory is true. And once again, if that theory is true and you apply it to this new situation, what will happen? What does that theory say is going to occur? All right, other key ideas. You're predicting a new finding. So this is a new prediction, something that should, that should occur. You're not explaining what is already known. So this is very key. We're not looking for theories that will explain behavior that's already been observed. We're not looking for theories that will explain experiments that have already been run. We're not looking for theories that will explain two things that have already been observed to go together. What we want is a new prediction, a new contribution. So keep that in mind. So if if I was doing research, if I was doing this project and I was doing drawing in the blind, I would not try to explain why the drawings by blind people look like the drawings by sighted people, because that's already been observed, that's already been tested, that's already been experimented on. What I want to do is I want to make a new prediction that's based on a new application. So for example, if with VR technology and Oculus technology, they now have 3D drawing programs. And I've seen people draw in 3D and they draw in a certain way and there's certain characteristics of that. A new application. What if they did that, but with tactile information? What if they made like a bodysuit that could give you tactile feedback? What would blind people draw like in this 3D situation? I'm not trying to explain something that is already known. I'm making a prediction about something that has not yet been found. So make sure that you have that distinction, and again, proceed. If this theory is true, then in this new situation, this thing will happen. And this is challenging, but this is why we're applying this, our ideas to new diverse populations. Because one of the easiest ways to say, oh, I actually have a new situation that will actually lead to a new prediction is to take a look at underrepresented or not as often studied populations. And we'll get to that when we get to the next section, which is on the drafts. All right, so again, for the synthesis part, the third section of your paper, when you put everything together, if this theory is true, then this will happen to this specific diverse or new population, so the population that you're interested in, and that's where you come up with your new prediction. So, what should you keep an eye out for? What might help you with this new population? What might help you apply an old theory to a new population? So things you should look out for, or what is a new population sometimes? Things you should look out for when you're reading your background knowledge or background theories. Look for something in the nature of these theories. So look for brain differences, areas of brain activation. Look for physiological features. So, for example, if your phenomenon requires the visual cortex, and you're dealing with a population that does not have a visual cortex, well, guess what? You can make a prediction that your phenomenon will not occur in that area. So one of the things that oftentimes occurs here is, especially if you're applying this to a clinical population, some clinical populations have overactive areas of their brain, right? People with attention deficit disorder have overactive frontal lobes. If your phenomenon depends upon frontal lobe activation, what will that do if you have an overactive frontal lobe? That could be your new contribution. So keep an eye out for those brain areas, for physiological differences, because if you can identify a brain area or a physiological difference, and then you can identify a diverse, unique population that does not match up with those differences, there's your new contribution, there's your door to that new contribution. Other things to keep an eye out is stuff in nurture. So take a look at cultural differences, environmental differences, developmental history. So there is a lot of kind of cross-cultural research that's been going on. Take a look. Where was your study done? Was it done in America? Was it done in Europe? Was it done somewhere else? Was it done in China or Japan? Take a look at the cultural differences. Could be the way that you apply to that new situation. Environmental differences. What was the kind of region that they were testing this in? Is it a rural area? Is it an urban area? Developmental history. Take a look at when did this study occur? Did it occur pre-internet? Did it occur post-internet? That's a huge developmental difference. If you have a study from 1960 or 1970, those individuals' developmental history is fundamentally different than somebody who was in a study in 2010, right? And these sort of impacts of technology can affect, what is going to occur. So take a look for those differences as well. And very importantly, look at subject characteristics, especially for that general research. So one of the things that is oftentimes brought up in terms of psychology experiments is that they tend to be limited to subjects that come from what is known as the weird population, and that is an acronym, WEIRD, for white, educated, industrialized, something. I forget the R and the D, but there's a certain type of person that is typically done or typically studied in your experiments. Take a look for those subject characteristics. Were they all males? Were they all females? Were they elderly? Were they young? Where did they come from? Were they college educated, not college educated? And again, see if that might be that in that you get to identify that, okay, this is that situation, but now I'm applying it to a new situation. I'm applying it to this population. You don't know if it's a new situation unless you really know what that original population was. Rural. Rural is the R, and the last one will come. Probably just have to Google it. Anyways, some final key ideas. Again, this is going to be your general outline for your theoretical work. Find a theory and then proceed as if that theory is true. So again, in your research, you'll find explanations for this phenomenon. Proceed as if that phenomenon is true. Apply it to a new situation, in our cases, a new population, and then say, if this theory is true, and I apply it to these people with these characteristics, then I predict this is going to happen, and that this is going to happen is your new one. So again, you might find theories that disagree. Pick one, proceed as if it's true. You're predicting that new finding, and again, not explaining what you actually know or what is actually known. And again, all of the time, if this theory is true and you apply it, what is this new thing that will happen? That is your basic outline for the work that we're doing. All right, any questions on that? Make sense? All right, cool. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to get a little specific about some of the things that I'm going to be looking for in the drafts. So what is it that you should be thinking about as you're writing your draft? Because as you're collecting your background information, it would be great to know what should go into your draft so that you can just kind of collect that as you go along and say, oh, this will work in the draft, this will not. So writing the drafts and peer reviews, we're going to go over the perception draft. I'll try to get rid of all the visuals, but there's one last one. The diversity draft and the synthesis draft. Your paper is going to have three major sections. Those are the three major sections. And then we'll talk about the general peer review. What will you be evaluated on for your drafts? And once again, on our roadmap, we want to get to that published article. And this is again right about, where'd it go? Come back. This is again right about here for the visual perception draft, visual perception peer reviews. This is getting ready for that aspect of it. And clearly I'm having some trouble with my animations here. One more time. There we go. All right. So the perception draft, not necessarily visual. First things first, we'll get done with the super easy stuff. Times New Roman font. It's done in APA style. So we're going to have Times New Roman font, all margins 1 inch all around, double spaced. That is classic APA style. So this is APA manuscript form. It will not look like the articles you download from a journal. It's going to look like what you submit to a journal. It's manuscript form, and that is your beginning formalization of manuscript form. In your perception draft, what do you need to cover? What is your basic outline for your perception draft? First and foremost, you need to explain what is your phenomenon. So what is the perceptual phenomenon that you're interested in? So is it the perception of, literally everybody's topic just went out of my mind, except for one, I'm gonna go with it. So is it the perception of sexual attraction, right? Is that the phenomenon that you're looking at? Is it the perception of racial, divisions? Is it the perception of whatever the perception of is? There's a phenomenon that you're looking for. What is that phenomenon? Communicate that to your reader. What is it that you're investigating? And then you're going to go over how does the typical, normal, regular, average perception system achieve this phenomenon? Basically, what has the research to date said about this phenomenon? And this is where you're going to give the relevant background needed for your diversity and synthesis sections. So for the perception draft, you are literally just taking a look at what has come before, and you are explaining to the reader what has come before. So if I was doing it on tactile and visual perception, because I was making a drawing in the blind prediction, I would say, this is how visual perception works, and this is the visual cortex and how it works. This is how tactile perception works, and here's the tactile cortex and how it works. And that's going to be what they need to know. And I won't talk about, people with developmental disorders. I won't talk about people with atypical brain localizations. I will talk about the general person. This is how their visual cortex works, and this is how their somatosensory cortex works. For the average person, this is how it all goes down. What you're looking for is you want to give the relevant background information that they're going to need to combine with the diversity section to understand your synthesis section. So you're going to need the pieces of your argument. You're going to need to give the background information that you need for the pieces of your argument, and that's all that you need to present. You don't need to be exhaustive. You don't need to present a million competing theories. You don't need to give a sort of review of the literature. You need to present what they need to know for your argument. That's your background information for your perception draft. How long is it going to be? There's a minimum that it needs to be. It needs to be as long as it needs to be. And the maximum is no longer than it needs to be. So that's not very helpful if you're looking for kind of hard and fast guidelines. But this is really, it's gonna depend from student to student. But just to kind of keep it in your mind, you're gonna know what you need to tell people about. Make sure that it's long enough so that you can tell people about it, tell the reader about it in sufficient detail that it makes sense. Don't go longer than it needs to be. Don't feel that you need to pad it. Don't feel that you need to have a certain word count. If you accomplish your goals and it makes sense and it's enough information and you'll know in the peer reviews, that's how long it needs to be. If you're looking for a number to shoot for, it's probably going to be 7 to 8 pages. Okay, so that's kind of, if you need that number, that's typically what I found is long enough without being too long, right? So in my experience, that's going to be like enough background to get the perception draft. All right, so that's your kind of real general outline of your perception draft. In terms of references, I'm going to say we're going to need at least 10-ish. So try to get 10. You can go higher in terms of your references if need be. Basically, you're looking to be convincing. So the more references you have, the more likely people are to believe what it is that you're saying. The more you say, let me proceed if this theory is true. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering if it's true, here's 10 papers that say, yes, this theory is true. That's a lot more convincing than saying, let me proceed as if this theory is true. And here's like one paper that thinks it's true. One person is backing this theory. Try to have enough so that, you're presenting other people's ideas, so we do need to cite, we do need to make sure that credit is given where credit is due. But definitely we want to have, that sort of amount that is persuasive, so that somebody will look at the research that we're citing and say, that's a good amount of agreement, that's a good amount of support for this. So at least 10-ish, you can go higher. It can be a mix of scholarly journals and other primary sources. So if you find other research that's been done by, say, organizations, right, you can get it off of their webpage. If you find other online resources, you can use those online resources as well. Feel free to use sources outside of your traditional psychology, journals and articles. However, you do need to include some scholarly journal articles, because nothing says this is a poorly researched paper more than a lack of scholarly journal articles. So you can supplement those articles with any sources that you want. You can supplement it with a documentary you've seen. You can supplement it with a news report you came across. You can supplement it with whatever you want, but make sure that it's primary sources. So if a news article says, scientists have discovered, the following, go to the article that it's mentioning. Find that article written by the scientists. But if it's not in a scholarly journal, that's fine. But make sure that you do have some scholarly journal articles in there. Make sure that you at least have 3 or 4 that you're drawing from, again, because we want to be convincing. All right, so that's the perception draft. You're outlining, this is the phenomenon that we're looking at. Your diversity draft is then going to outline what is your population. So what is different about your population compared to the typical, normal, regular, average perceptual system? So if you're dealing with individuals with ADHD, what are their characteristics? What is there to know about individuals with ADHD, specifically as it relates to your perception section, right? So if you're dealing with Generation Z, what is it about Generation Z that's different from previous generations? If you're dealing with people with certain sexual orientations, what is it about those sexual orientations that's different from other sexual orientations? So what are the characteristics that makes your population different? That's where you're going to outline this for the reader. And it's going to be in your diversity section. So you're going to say things like, I'm dealing with this population. Here are some of the characteristics of this population. Specifically, we're going to focus on these differences here, because again, that's what's going to set up your synthesis section. So focus this area on the key differences, the differences that you need to know. You're going to give a little bit of a background, but then you're going to be saying, okay, this is what you need to know. So ADHD, what you need to know is that it affects this area of the brain. We're not going to give an exhaustive textbook summary of what ADHD is, but we're going to say it involves frontal lobe function. If frontal lobe function is what you're trying to tie into your perception section. So once again, the length of this, once again, minimum, as long as it needs to be, maximum, no longer than it needs to be. Once again, probably around 7 to 8 pages. So when you introduce the population, when you explain the characteristics, when you explain what underlies those characteristics, is it a cultural development? Is it a physiological thing? Is it brain activity? Is it, whatever it is, you're probably going to end up with about 7 to 8 pages. And in terms of references, once again, we're looking for at least 10-ish, and you can have that mix of primary journal articles and other primary sources, but you should include some scholarly journal articles, something about, here's a survey of what this population is all about, and that was published in some scholarly journal. All right, so that's the diversity draft. And then finally, the synthesis draft. We're going to put it all together. This is going to be the one where you have the least citations, because this is going to be the one where you have the most novel contributions, the most of your own work. So when you finally hand this in, just so that we're clear on this, you're going to include the 2 previous sections plus 2 new sections for this, all right? So you're going to include your revised perception draft, and you're going to include your revised diversity draft. That's why we're giving the feedback in time for you to redo it for the next section. And then you're going to include your new synthesis section. So you're going to have an introduction that's going to precede your perception draft. So the introduction is actually going to be pretty short. It'll probably be like about 2 pages, where you kind of set up the mystery, right? You set up the phenomenon, you build a mystery, and you say, well, here's this phenomenon, but here's this new situation, this new population. What's going to happen for this new population, right? Here's this perceptual phenomenon, the perception of sexual attraction. Here we have this new population, the population of furries. What are they going to have as sexually attracted? What are they going to do? So you build that mystery. You kind of ask that question, point it out to the reader. What are we going to find? That's what your introduction section is all about. That is then going to be followed by your perception draft with any necessary changes that you had due to your feedback. That is then going to be followed by your diversity draft, again, with any necessary changes. And then that is finally going to be followed by your synthesis section. And that's your new contribution based on deductions, saying, if the theory outlined in my perception draft is true, and my diverse population has the characteristics I outlined in the diversity section, then this should be their new behavior. This is the behavior that I'm predicting. And that's what you're going to spell out in your synthesis section. So all of this together, we're still going to keep it Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins all around. Length, once again, what we've seen before, no longer than it needs to be. For this one, probably we're going to get to 21 to 24 pages, depending upon how long your introduction and your synthesis section is. So remember, 7 to 8-ish for the perception draft, 7 to 8-ish for the diversity draft. All together with the synthesis and the introduction, once again, 7 to 8-ish pages. All together, it's going to be 21 to 24 pages in length. All right, and in terms of references, the total is going to be at least 20-ish, and that includes the 10-ish from your perception draft and the 10-ish from your diversity draft. Do not be surprised if in your synthesis section, you don't have any new references. Because again, this is mostly going to be your work. This is mostly going to be you saying, if these theories that I told you about here are true, and the characteristics that I told you about here are true, then this is what we can expect, and it's novel. If nobody else has ever said that, that's your new contribution. So if you need any additional ones, like if you need something in your synthesis section, or if you want to put one in your introduction, feel free to put that in as well. And again, it can be a mix of scholarly journals and other primary sources, but make sure that you do include some of those scholarly journals. All right, any questions on the drafts and what's kind of expected to be in the drafts? Okay, so as a final sort of guideline for what you're doing, I also included what you're going to be asked to evaluate when you're peer reviewing. So this is going to be a guide to how to do the peer review, but it's also going to be a guide to how to write a good draft, because you're going to know what people are looking for, so you're going to know exactly what to include in your drafts. So in general, you're going to be evaluating a number of criteria, and then they will be evaluated, like some of them will be evaluated across all three, other ones will not. So one of the criteria that you're going to be used to evaluate in your peer reviews is the submission an original contribution that cannot be found elsewhere? And that is going to be restricted just to the synthesis draft. Because by definition, your perception draft will not be an original contribution that cannot be found elsewhere, because you're literally just summarizing contributions that can be found elsewhere, right? So it's not going to be novel. Diversity draft, not going to be novel. But your synthesis draft, where you put everything together, that's going to be novel. So is the submission an original contribution? Think about that when you're doing your synthesis draft. Make it that original contribution that's never been seen before. Does the submission analyze the subject to an adequate depth? Is the text rigorous enough? If not, where could it be developed? This is going to be done for all three sections. So when you're going through and you're writing your draft, ask yourself, does the submission analyze the subject to an adequate depth? Have you gone in to enough detail? Is the text rigorous enough? Have you gone through enough of the details? Have you spelled it out for your reader? And if not, where could it be developed? So this is going to be when you're peer reviewing. Basically, if you're confused in a section, that section is not written well enough, it's not rigorous enough, or it's not adequate enough depth. So one way that you know if something is analyzed to an adequate depth, one easy way to know if the subject is written about in enough depth, if you as an intelligent person reads the information and you have to go to Google, then it's not adequate depth. Your drafts should not require your reader to Google anything. So if they need to know about something, if they need to know about a concept, if they need to know about an idea, or they need to know about a theory, you put it in the paper. And if you, as a reviewer of somebody's paper, are reading anything and you're confused and you have to Google anything, let the reader know and say, this has to be explained in more depth because I had to go to Google, so that's not enough. So no, you should be able to read these and understand them without resorting to Google. Is the text rigorous enough? Do you spell it out for individuals? Do you actually tell them, well, the somatosensory cortex is involved in tactile perception and tactile tasks. Drawing is a tactile task. And then you just leave it. Can't do that. Not rigorous enough. Spell it out. It's involved in tactile tasks. Drawing is a tactile task. Therefore, drawing is involved in the somatosensory cortex. Make sure that you spell it out for your readers. And again, if you find that it's not enough, when you're doing a peer review, let them know. Let them know, this paragraph, didn't really understand it. This explanation of the characteristics, spell it out a little bit more for your reader, because I had to go to Google. All right. Alrighty. Take this manual. Okay, number 3. Does the submission offer a balanced, critical view, avoiding bias, or a highly subjective opinion? This is going to be for all the sections that we're going to be reviewing. This is a very important one to try to do your best to do, but I understand we are humans. We do have biases, sometimes hidden biases that we are not aware of. This is one of the big reasons why we're doing peer reviews. So we are doing a lot of research that is on sensitive subjects. We are doing a lot of research that is on sensitive populations. And we have strong feelings towards those populations. That's one of the reasons why we've chosen this research, because of those strong feelings. That is all well and good, and I completely super support. Go where you want to go, to delve into your research. Do what you're interested in. Do what you personally feel conviction to do, but avoid the bias. So a lot of times when I go into a research project, I know what I want to find, and I really want to find it. So I was just doing research on metaphors in comic books. We were just looking at some data, and I know what I was really hoping I would find in that data, and I didn't. It's not there. So I need to report that in an unbiased way. Same thing with your projects. Make sure that you go where the data takes you. Make sure that you go where the predictions take you. And you might wish that the prediction didn't go in a certain way. You might wish that the deductive logic ended up on the other side. But if your theories are deductively pointing you to that direction, go to that direction. And make sure that you're avoiding biased languages. Try as much as you can to avoid judgmental language, like this is good, this is bad, this is positive, this is negative. Because again, we are dealing with a lot of sensitive material, and we want to make sure that we get to the truth as much as possible and avoid that kind of language. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be something that your drafts will be peer reviewed for. Does the submission show an awareness of the previous existing scholarship? Are all facts, particularly disputable information, verified and referenced? If not, please explain what areas could be developed. Citations for references should be in the APA format. That's going to be for all sections. So if you say something in your work and it's not your own personal idea, make sure that you reference it. If you say anything that somebody reading it would think to themselves, I don't agree with that whatsoever, give it a reference. That's basically your way of saying, this is not an opinion, this is something that people have found. This is something that people, have previously shown. So, for example, the furry subculture, right? If people are familiar with furries, it was sort of associated with sexual activity and sexual attraction. If a theory comes out and says furries have nothing to do, the furry lifestyle has nothing to do with sexual attraction, I would be, based on what I've known before, I would say, I don't believe it. That needs a citation. That needs a piece of evidence, something that points to, if you don't believe this, you can go check out this work. So make sure that your stuff is referenced, and make sure that you're referencing it as much as needed, and make sure that those citations are in APA format. So this would be a good time when you're putting together your outlines and you're drawing on your background theories, make sure that you know where you're getting these ideas from. It'll help you a lot when you're going back and adding in your citations. So, awareness of the subject, make sure that you have those 10-ish citations to convince people, oh yeah, they actually know their stuff. Make sure that you're using those citations and make sure that they're in APA format, and that's going to be for all sections as well. We practice writing a lot. You're in, in your senior year of university. Your submission should be free of typos and obvious spelling, syntax, grammatical mistakes. The English should be at a good enough quality for publication. That's going to be for every single draft. Do your best. I know that for peer reviews, that's part of the reason why we do this. I know that when I was doing this for my PhD, I did my work on visual angles, and my supervisor just found it hilarious every single time I wrote about visual angels, right? It's going to happen, but do your best. And if you find typos, just let the let the reader know, or let the submitter know. All right, I think this might be the last of the. Oh no, this is a big one to remember. Does the submission refer specifically to images included? So if you are going to use images, if you are going to use figures, if you are going to use diagrams, I highly recommend it. I'm a very visual person. I love articles that have visuals in them. I think it really helps. But they need to be, because we're going to publish this in a journal, because that's one of the end goals, they need to be from a third party where the copyright has been considered, and they need to be attributed to the original source. We need to cite images when we use it, and we need to get clear, high-resolution, relevant images that have text at a reasonable size, and that's going to be for all drafts. So you do not need to use images or visuals or figures in your drafts. You don't. But if it's helpful, if they're relevant, if it would help to explain the phenomenon, if I'm trying to indicate where the somatosensory cortex is, a figure will do wonders for that. So you got to refer specifically to images, so you have to have that see figure 1. And importantly for us, they need to be correctly attributed, and copyright needs to be considered. So copyright is incredibly difficult to get for images. You have to contact the original copyright owner. You have to wait for them to decide that they're going to allow you to use that information, that image. So what we're going to do for this course and for these articles is we're going to sidestep that by using images in the public domain or that are covered under a Creative Commons license. Basically, we're going to go to Wikimedia Commons, and we're going to use images from Wikimedia. So these are, there's a link for their page. These are images that are either in the public domain, or the creator of the image has allowed people to use it as long as they've been attributed. And that information can be found on each individual section. So if I needed a picture of a brain, say the hippocampus, I would use that from Wiki Commons. If I needed an image to show the dimensions of visual color space, I might use this image. If I needed to show the dimensions of a different color space, I would use this image. So basically, you can use any image that you can find in there, or images that you own the copyright to. So if you take a photograph of something, if you draw your own image, absolutely feel free to use that, but we need to make sure that it's attributed and that it has that Creative Commons license. All right, and that's going to be for all the drafts as well. References, make sure that you have references in the reference text and that they're all in APA style. And that's going to be for all as well. And then finally is going to be when you're evaluating this. And this is going to be less for when you're writing, but more for when you're doing your peer reviews. You're going to give an overall summary of the submission and anything that might not have been specifically touched upon in the peer review. If you found something glaringly that needs to be changed, but it wasn't one of the criteria, feel free to include that, and we'll mention that in every single draft as well. All right, we got 3 minutes left, and that is what I wanted to cover. Any questions about the peer review process or the drafts? All right, well, next class, we're going to start off with our first student presentations. Make sure you check your dates for when your student presentation is going to occur. Remember that you are presenting the synopsis of an article. You're looking for that one main point. And if it comes up that you cannot make your presentation date, take a look for open days in the syllabus and let me know as soon as possible, and I'll try my best to reschedule you for another day. And other than that, we are finished.